No one knew that the death of an archduke on June 28, 1914 would ultimately cause an all-out war across Europe. Men were to die, resources depleted, and the world was changed forever.
Yo, Ryan, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Sorry to interrupt your light reading.
Yeah, just very light.
Do you just want to have an after-school discussion about World War I?
That sounds great, actually. What do you have in mind?
I just thought it was interesting how the alliance system kind of instigated the entire conflict.
No, I entirely agree. In fact, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand really was a catalyst for initiation for the entire foundation of World War I.
I would definitely agree, and especially talking about the Allied powers, about how they economically tethered themselves to the well-being of France and Russia by giving them loans.
Exactly. The bankers and large companies were essentially really pushing for war because it was in their vested interest. It was a vested interest for them to receive money for their loans that they had given to Britain and France.
I agree.
On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was next in line for the Austrian throne, and his wife Sophie were both assassinated while on a visit to Serbia. War was declared between Serbia and Austria, all because the Serbian prince was killed, and was basically considered the Prince Charles of Austria. Anyway, Austria had signed a treaty along with Germany and Italy called the Triple Alliance, saying that if one of them went to war against another country, that the rest of them would also go to war. On the other hand, there was another set of 3 countries which had signed an already a very similar action. Anyway, Austria had signed a treaty with Germany and Russia declaring that if one were to go to war with another, that all of the countries in that alliance would actually go to war. On the other hand, there was another set of countries, 3 countries, which had signed a very similar treaty. These countries consisted of Britain, France, and Russia. Russia was a supporter of Serbia, so when the Triple Alliance declared war on Serbia, Russia became involved. And that is the way that France and Russia also became involved. Britain used to own almost half the countries in the world. So when Britain went to war, so did they. This included Australia, New Zealand, India, hence the World War had begun. Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia following the assassination of the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. Russia joined in to help Serbia because of a separate agreement. Germany, an ally of Austria-Hungary, then declared war on Russia. Therefore, Germany began to move troops to the neutral sovereign state of Belgium to attack France. The British were not obliged to help the French in the event of a war, and did not declare war when German forces invaded Belgium on August 4, 1914. Only when Britain ordered Germany to withdraw immediately from Belgium, and Germany refused, did the United Kingdom actually declare war on Germany. The British Army during World War I fought the largest and most costly war it has ever in its long history. Unlike the French and German armies, its units were made up exclusively of volunteers as opposed to conscripts at the beginning of the conflict. Furthermore, the British Army was considerably smaller than its French and German counterparts, but they had a total of 1.1 million volunteers by the end of 1914. And by the end of 1915, shortly before Britain adopted to conscription, the voluntary principle of unequal sacrifice had produced no further than 2.4 million volunteer recruits by adapting to the changing demographics of the workforce. War-related industries grew rapidly and production increased as different groups of people pulled together. In that regard, the war is also credited by some drawing women into mainstream employment for the first time, and forcing politicians to grant a large number of women the vote in 1918.
Now I'm like frozen. No, I mean, if you think about World War I, I'll change the subject a little bit. If you think about World War I, it was in essence the last war fought for honor. If you look at, say, Wilhelm, he was very concerned about honor. If you look at someone like Britain, they entered the war. Why? Because of the invasion of Belgium, so forth and so on. And it's really this honor that becomes corrupt and it finally is bankrupt at the end of the war. And part of the disillusionment or the age of anxiety is precisely because so much of the reason to going to war was for honor. The Lusitania, for example, sinking because of unrestricted submarine warfare. Americans are outraged by this, but by World War II, 20 years later, they're using unrestricted submarine warfare. What has happened? Well, the attitude has changed, and we really see a distinct, shall we say, corruption and breakdown of the old order.
France was a German target from the start of the Great War. The conquest of this Allied power was the intention behind the 1905 Schieffelin Plan, a German offensive construed by Alfred von Schieffelin 4 years prior. German soldiers ordered to wait for the mobilization of Russian troops, at which point they would embark on the attack against France. Schieffelin did not achieve victory. Modifications were made by Helmuth von Moltke, German Chief of Staff. Germany reached 30 miles of Paris. Nonetheless, there were losses on both sides, and France survived as an Allied power. The French army laid in the hands of Joseph Joffre for nearly 5 years. He was appointed in 1911 at a time in which France was in political turmoil and morale was low. He was the brains behind the strategy, contrast to the Schieffelin Plan, the reconquest of Alsace-Lorraine and the Saar region. It salvaged Paris, credited to his mastery of logistics and troop movements. In the summer of 1914, 2.9 million French and colonial troops were mobilized on the Western Front. Conscription pertained to men under the age of 45, doubling the size of the army by 1870. In the summer of 1914, 2.9 million French and colonial troops were mobilized on the Western Front. Conscription pertained to men under the age of 45, doubling the size of the army of 1870. By 1918, 83,170,000 men had tramped battlegrounds. But German defeat came at the expense of 4.2 million casualties and 1.3 million dead. Nivelle composed a massive new offensive that was to break through German defenses. Launched in April of 1917, it continued through May. Ultimately a failure, the Germans had strengthened their defenses, and disagreements rose between British and France. Not to mention, the exhaustion from the previous 2 years of fighting led some French troops to refuse to enter the battlefield. The French made only slight gains. He was replaced by General Henri-Philippe Pétain, whose main effort was to raise morale.
Russia, a large and towering power in Europe, an undesirable opponent but a desirable ally. The Triple Entente was the name given to the alliance among France, Russia, and Britain, after signing the Anglo-Russian Entente in 1907, but before the war had even started. This stunning alliance was supplemented by various agreements with most notably the U.S. This team proved to be a powerful counterweight to the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The sides had been set, and the war had begun. Nicholas II had a humbling romantic vision of him leading his army to victory. Therefore, he spent most of his time battling on the Eastern Front. This proved to be detrimental to the great country of Russia, because not only was there a great loss in manpower and resources, but Eastern fighting left Alexander in control back in the cities. Russia was hurting, but who was to pay for it? Alexandra, the wife of Nicholas II, was an ardent admirer of Rasputin's healing powers, and as a result, Rasputin gained growing influence in Russia. He was said to be a divine man of God and our friend. Others who opposed him referred to him as the Mad Monk, though never in public if they wanted to face the wrath of Alexandra. Ironically, with the destruction that World War I was to cause to Russia, it was Rasputin himself who advised Nicholas not to go to war. He had predicted that Russia would be defeated, and in some aspects, it was. After September 1915, Rasputin's power in St. Petersburg was deadly and unchallengeable.
Now, the Allied powers consisted mainly of Britain, France, and Russia. Russia, however, left the war because of the fact that they suffered a major revolution which caused the Tsar, or King, of Russia to be dethroned/abdicated in favor of a communist regime. This forced Russia to leave the war and left France and Britain to fend for themselves against the Central Powers.
Prior to 1915, the United States took a neutral stance on the war. However, on February 4th, 1915, Germany announces that all ships in the British shipping zone will be targets. President Woodrow Wilson exclaimed that he would hold Germany accountable for any ships lost. Germany began to test him on May 7th, 1915, when they sunk the RMS Lusitania, killing over 120 Americans in the process. This is when tensions began to mount. Foreign Minister Alfred Zimmermann tried to provoke Mexico and Japan into attacking the U.S. with promise of German assistance after they conquer Europe. However, this message was intercepted by the British and sent to the U.S. President Wilson and Congress declared war on April 6, 1917.
Now, this initially was a very bad thing for the Allied powers, meaning because they were outnumbered and outgunned. However, poor leadership among the Central powers meant that they did not capitalize on the gains, and this allowed the U.S. to enter the war later, allowing them to then push the Central powers back from their initial gains they had made during the first months of the war. The main turning point of the war was the U.S. The trench warfare system that had been seen earlier was in a stalemate. This was seen that because neither side could gain ground at all in any way, shape or form because of the massive fortifications that had been built up over the years. What America did was bring technology and new and gas weapons and tanks. Guy's a veteran over there. He survived the battle of Somme. Anyway, salute the veterans. As we can see, it was because of America that the Allied powers were able to make up the gains they had lost during the earlier stages of the war.
In 1914, 300 million. Yeah, Borland's gonna love it.
Nope.
Go.
Don't film me eating breakfast.
Thank you very much.
It's happening.
I'm gonna spill food out of my mouth.
Very hard.
No, I'm not actually.
Oh. Go. 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 Come on.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine. You're fine. Wait, he's. You can go. Go ahead. Go ahead. Action.
8 million. That's a large number. 8,317,000,000. Doesn't make sense.
Who is it?
Shivam? Oh, hey, Ryan.
Hello.
Do you... what are you doing? Yeah, he's peace.
What? To war against another country. That's just look at the camera. The supporter of Serbia. And so when the Triple Alliance declared war on declared war on no. Mike, you missed my video.